Everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, along with Manny Hill. And look, I totally understand, Manny, if you want to turn around and look at the TV and watch Carolina and Chicago because it's a barn burner of a game. We've got Amir Smith-Marset return and punts. We've got these quarterbacks just laser show left and right. Great passes between Bajent and Bryce Young, who has basically no wide receivers. I don't think actually it's one that people are going to be too sad about tuning in to listen to us rather than watching. Or if you really don't like yourself, you could do both and watch the game and then come and watch us. Boy, they nailed it on this Thursday, man. They made it great for people to rather tune into our live broadcast than what's going on TV. This has been a miserable schedule of national TV games.
Man, and I feel for I feel for our friend Courtney Cronin right now, who's like out there in Chicago. Of course, she covers the Bears for ESPN, and she's out there in Chicago, and it's like cold, and the Bears aren't any good. And now you've got the Panthers in town in Chicago, and they're not any good either. Justin Fields isn't even playing in the game, and so shout out to our friend Courtney, who's just toughing it out there in Chicago. Yeah, these Thursday night games, man. You know me, I'm already like anti-Thursday night football anyway in the NFL. I just think it's really dumb unless it's Thanksgiving, which is, we've always been seeing the Lions and the Cowboys playing Thanksgiving every year for decades. Outside of that, and maybe week one, that sort of thing too, to start off the season is kind of cool. But outside of that, I want no parts of Thursday night football, and games like tonight are exactly why.
Yeah, it's just excessive. And, I guess what they used to do, if I'm not mistaken, is they would late in the season, early, years ago in the NFL, they would have like a game on Thursday night, or it would be a couple of like special, hey, we're doing this in late November. They're going to have this game. And I could be wrong about this, but before they started doing it every single week and then diluted the product, and I'm just not ready for it. Even when it's a good game, I feel like I'm not ready for it. That we've just recovered from the last week and we're preparing for the next matchup. And then, like, oh, you've got a game. And the times where the Vikings have played on Sunday and then on Thursday, they've won some of those games. But usually it's pretty hideous for one, which we see, I think, the quality of play, the injuries, which the NFL wants to always talk about, and then puts guys out there a few days after going through what they do on Sunday. But usually it's just the way that the team ends up looking and how quickly they have to turn it around. You barely have any practice. So how are you even supposed to install game plans at that point? And I think that plays into it. But we are never going to get it back that way of just having the NFL on Sunday and Monday Night Football. So I guess we can embrace Panthers and Bears. Now, we got a lot to talk about, Manny. You have made a list of the 5 best Saints and Vikings games of your lifetime, of which there are a lot of nominees. And I know that you spent all afternoon, and this I'm not actually kidding, researching and looking back at some games to talk about tonight. So we'll get to that later on. This matchup is always really something. But Justin Jefferson talked today, and he said that he doesn't want to be just 80 or 90% if he's returning. He wants to be at 100%. And he also said, in response to people who had put out there that Justin Jefferson might not return because of his contract situation, he said that he never considered that and that he wants to be a Hall of Famer. And you don't make the Hall of Fame by just sitting out halves of seasons, that no matter what their record was, he was going to come back. Based on what I saw from him during training camp, I completely believe Justin Jefferson in this, but I also want to tell him he's making the right choice. Like, dude, don't come back too fast, because we've seen this many times in the past where guys do come back from those hamstrings and they push it and then they hurt themselves. So what is your feeling about Jefferson, where he stands, whether he actually will come back, and how long he should wait now that the window is open for him to return off of IR?
Yeah, I think he's got the right mindset in that, we know Justin Jefferson's very competitive, and he wants to play, and he wants to show out, and he wants to still, show people that he's the best wide receiver in football. So, you know, he wants to get back out there, but I like the fact that he's going to wait until he feels 100%, because you don't want to come out there a week or two early and, you know, potentially do more damage to that hamstring to the point where now you are out for the season because you came back too early and now all of a sudden the hamstring is torn because you didn't wait that extra week to kind of rest it and let it heal completely. And now at that point, you know, considering where we are at the point of the season, a hamstring tear would be very likely that the season is done. And so then you're just coming back too early for no reason at that point. So I think it makes sense for him to not come back until he feels 100%. And I think with what we've seen the last couple of games, that, you know, I'm certainly not going to suggest that the Vikings don't need Justin Jefferson because they absolutely do to be at their best. But I think what they've shown the last couple of weeks, especially Sunday, with everything that went on that day, that, you know, Kevin O'Connell can scheme this team to be very competitive and still have a chance to win games, especially when you look at their schedule coming up. Things aren't going to get too dicey until Cincinnati and Detroit come up in the sort of that last quarter of the season. But these next few games, these are all winnable games for them. And so there's not going to be a need for him to come back too early. You know, maybe if they were playing, you know, if that Eagles game that they had early in the season was coming up in the next couple of weeks, then maybe there might be a little bit more of an enticement to push him out there sooner. But I think as long as the schedule is the way it is right now, these next few games that are very winnable without him, I don't see any reason to rush him back at all.
Yeah, I think you just have to think about the long term of both this season and the long term of Justin Jefferson as a Minnesota Viking in general, because like this, even it's happened to Devontae Adams, where he's always kind of dealing with some hamstring thing here or there. And I don't know where that stems back to. And sometimes it just happens to players. But I can give you a few examples right off the top of my head. 2019 Adam Thielen, where he gets hurt on that great touchdown catch against Detroit and then tries to come back a few weeks later against Kansas City, hurts it again. And Delvin Cook in 2018, where he was coming off the ACL, and sometimes that leads to some other injuries. So, you know, he ends up getting the hamstring. They try to bring him back. He re-aggravates the hamstring. Then we're talking a few more weeks before he's 100%. And then, you know, Ken in the comments brings up a pitch count. They tried to do that with Delvin Cook, and I thought it hurt them more than it helped him. I want him 100% before he returns. And that leads me to something else, which I'm sure you remember the Jay-Z line where he said, I read a newspaper that messed up my day. I read a question from someone to the mailbag that messed up my day, where someone asked, hey, they went 4-0 without Justin Jefferson. Does this mean that they should trade him? And I just like, what are we doing here? I mean, look, the win against San Francisco was great. The rest of the wins are against pretty bad teams. And the goal is not to just be good enough to beat Atlanta. The goal is to be good enough to win the Super Bowl. And in order to win the Super Bowl, you need great players. I mean, I guess it was bound to come up. Look, they went 4-0 without him. So they didn't win that many games with him. But this is like one of the best players in all of football. And we've seen so many times, Manny, where a Tyreek Hill, an AJ Brown, a player of this caliber can take a quarterback to another level. That's your big goal here. So I don't think that the way it's played out this year has changed anything about how I feel about how much money Justin Jefferson needs to have in his wallet next offseason. And that is all the money still for Justin Jefferson. And by the way, when they were 1-4, wasn't Justin Jefferson the best receiver in the league? I mean, he did fumble once, but he didn't drop the ball in the end zone like TJ Hawkinson did. I mean, the guy was completely dominating through that time. So I feel like I had to get that off my chest, that like this can't be an opinion. We cannot let this happen to be talking about Jefferson's future just through the lens of, hey, they won those games.
Well, I mean, and Vikings fans should know we've experienced this before when we've had a dominant wide receiver on this football team, Randy Moss, who was like all world, one of the greatest receivers of all time. And we saw what Randy was able to do and how he elevated the play of the quarterbacks that he played with. He even elevated the play of the greatest quarterback of all time, Tom Brady, when he went to New England. We saw Tom Brady's numbers. I mean, Brady was great before Moss got there, but we saw Brady's overall production as a passer increase when Randy Moss became his teammate. And Justin Jefferson is kind of the same way. He makes the quarterbacks that he plays with better. And so, I think you want him at 100%. You want him as a huge part of this team going forward. You get the contract figured out. And then, whoever the quarterback is going to be, whether it's, if Kirk Cousins comes back next year, or if it's a young guy that they go in the draft, or if it's Josh Dobbs, whoever it may be, that quarterback is going to be better for it if Justin Jefferson is on the field. And that's why it's important in this particular situation for him to be 100% before he returns for, the short term, as far as the short term goes for this team. And like you said, the long term as well.
And we also have to keep in mind that if you're going to compete for a Super Bowl, which if you look back at Vikings history, how many times they've really been a true contender for the Super Bowl. I mean, one of them, of course, is with Randall Cunningham and Randy Moss. The other one is with Brett Favre. And what they have, and we'll talk about 1987 maybe when you come up with your list with New Orleans, but what they have had in those years is elite passing games. 2017 was the anomaly with Case Keenum, although their passing game that year was very good with Thielen and Diggs. It's not enough to be a good passing team. It's that you have to be an elite passing team. You have to be a top 5 scoring team. I think that I had this stat, but since 2015, when the Broncos won the Super Bowl with a bad offense, every team has been in the top 5 in scoring except the Rams in 2021, who I think were 7th, but were also at the top of the league in passing expected points added. It's not enough to be good. I think they could be good with Jordan Addison and with TJ Hawkinson. And maybe if you traded him for 2 first-round draft picks or something, you get an edge rusher to go along with Danielle Hunter. And again, that would be great. But the thing that's going to drive your success the most is that. And if you're talking about drafting a quarterback, giving him Justin Jefferson, giving him Jordan Addison for what we've seen, giving him TJ Hawkinson over the last 4 weeks, those guys, I think it's been big for those guys. But it's not like you have to give it back. Like with Addison, he's learned what he's learned about playing in the NFL and being a top wide receiver, and he can continue to carry that on. We've seen massive growth from him. We've seen Hawkinson step up quite a bit since Jefferson went down. It's not like those guys all of a sudden go like, oh, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to, right? So, I mean, I think that that's one of the biggest reasons that if we're talking about the Vikings with this current setup with Josh Dobbs can make the playoffs, that's one of the reasons you'd be talking about it is if Jefferson comes back for that stretch run where they're going up against Detroit, they're going up against Cincinnati, that's where you're going to need to compete with those teams because those are elite passing games. But I'm not saying that this is a common opinion with the Jefferson thing. It's just that every time someone's negotiating a contract, it kind of like hits some people the wrong way. And it's okay. It's okay. It's okay to pay the greatest players. We can do that. Now, speaking of Dobbs, we've gone too long now into the show without talking about Dobbs mania. Do you think that he keeps it rolling against the New Orleans Saints, Manny? Because I was looking this up, little stat for you. PFF grades the New Orleans Saints defense the 4th best in the entire NFL. And I think this is going to be a real test for Kevin O'Connell and the rest of the group and Josh Dobbs against the New Orleans Saints.
Yeah, I think it's an opportunity for them to really show that Sunday wasn't just a sort of a fluky, out of nowhere performance. I happen to think, based on what we saw, considering the circumstances on Sunday, I happen to think that it's not going to be a fluke. I do think Josh Dobbs is going to continue to play well. Now, what it's going to look like on Sunday, it might be different. It might, from a numbers standpoint, it might not look as impressive because they're going to be going up against a pretty quality defense that's going to challenge them. But I think ultimately what you want to look for in a game like this is you want to just hope that the Vikings can limit the mistakes, can have the safety and the fumbles and that sort of thing, which, if there's one thing about Josh Dobbs that he's shown so far is that he does have a tendency to turn the ball over a little bit. So you just want to avoid that. If you don't score 31 points and light up the defense on Sunday, I think that's okay. I think the Vikings defense themselves has shown that, that's not a great unit, but it's a unit that I think is good enough to keep you in games. And the Saints don't really, I don't think their offense particularly is very good. So I think this is a chance for the Vikings defense to perform really well. And I think offensively, if they can just limit the mistakes, maybe control the clock a little bit, pick up first downs, do long sustaining drives, then I think they can come away with a win. It just might not be a situation where they, put up 31 points like they did on Sunday against Atlanta.
I'm still in my brain wondering, like, how did they put up 31 points? Because we saw so many like great passing performances by Kirk Cousins before that. And of course, I don't blame anybody for saying, well, you saw him run, and sometimes you get those extra first downs, you score a few more points when that happens. I don't blame anybody for pointing out that it's wild that Josh Dobbs scored more points than they had with Cousins. I would also say, just like the Justin Jefferson 4-0 without him thing, let's not go too far in, conflating those two kind of facts, but it was impressive to see how they were able to sustain drives with Josh Dobbs once he stopped getting safeties and fumbling the football. And it is going to be a lot more challenging. I think that New Orleans defense is way better. So it very much could continue. And if it does, then we might be having a little bit of a different discussion. And I'm not sure why Manny just disappeared. Maybe his camera ran out. But
still here.
can you
I think
still
my
hear me,
camera
Manny?
just,
Okay.
yeah, I'm still here.
Now we got a new angle,
Laptop
a new
camera
Manny
now.
angle. There
Yeah.
you go. I was wondering because you were kind of sputtering a little bit, and usually we have been on really good internet connections lately. Now you actually look a little bit smoother. So anyway, well, Ken brings up an interesting discussion there. See, just like Kevin O'Connell, no panic from me, just smooth sailing right through. Called a little audible. You did. You changed. Yeah, we're on the same page. We were like Dobbs and O'Connell. Ken brings up this point that this is going to be the best defense that the Vikings will see for the rest of the season. I think that's 100% correct, which kind of leads me to this, Manny. At what point would you entertain the hey, can Dobbs be the quarterback of this team discussion? And I'm not anywhere near there yet. And I want to see how this plays out against a really good New Orleans team with lots of star talent across the board. But looking forward at the schedule, there's going to be a moment where we cross over potentially into, hey, should we talk about this guy? Like, because right now it's, hey, what a great story, rocket scientist, super fun game, great job by everybody, but okay, we'll see if it carries on. When would that be for you?
It's a great question. I think, if they can rattle off a few games in a row here and really get themselves into a position where I'll word it this way. If they can get themselves back into a significant conversation of maybe winning this division down the stretch, like if we get to that first Detroit game, which I think is week 15 or something like that, late in the season, if we get to week 15 and they're right there with a chance to win this division with a win over Detroit and, maybe tie them in record or something like that, that's going to have me thinking, okay, maybe this guy can pull this off. Maybe this guy can be, a multi-year starter for this team. Certainly not in a position where you want to give him a 6-year, Kirk Cousins level type of contract or anything like that. But he might be a guy that can kind of hold down the fort for you for a couple of years until, you get into that point where you really want to move on to a younger quarterback. But I'm like you, I'm not ready to say that yet. I think right now it just looks like he's going to be a guy that can kind of stabilize the position right now for now until you're really ready to go on to that younger guy for next year. But who knows? I mean, he's got the physical ability to do it. I think it's just a matter of him kind of putting it all together and staying consistent, limiting some of the mistakes, and then we'll see what happens after that.
Rob asks, could he be a candidate for a bridge quarterback? And I think that's the discussion we're having is like, when do we talk about that?
Yeah.
Right now, the answer is look, and by the way, Pro Football Reference needs to give him the win for Sunday because they gave it to Jaron Hall, just like our buddy Sage Rosenfels, who had a 20-point comeback win when he was in Miami and didn't get the W because Gus Frerotte started. So anyway, that in my mind makes him 2-9 as a career starter. And I know QB wins. I don't need the whole thing, but just based on the guy's history, the bar is higher for him to prove that this is legit. It's sort of like with Geno Smith and what we saw last year, where you're going through that season and going, okay, well, Geno Smith is doing well, but like, does that mean that he is their franchise quarterback? I don't know. And then this year, we've seen sort of the ups and downs of Geno Smith and even did throughout last year. And it tells you how small sample size can fool us when it comes to quarterbacks. They get on a hot run, they play an easy schedule, whatever else, and then they look better than they are. But I think as far as a bridge quarterback, the answer would be maybe, and so many things have to depend on that, though. Like, how does he play the rest of the way? In my opinion, it's probably if you get one of those two against Detroit, because I think they can win some of these other games and they'll probably have a stinker in there somewhere. But if you can get one of those two against Detroit, or if you could go toe to toe against Cincinnati with Josh Dobbs in as your quarterback, then I would say, like, I'm thinking about it, because that's the level of opponent that you have to beat and you have to go up against in order to have somebody as your quarterback and make me think you could actually compete with them. But the thing about a bridge quarterback is, as long as we're talking about a Ryan Fitzpatrick and Tua type of situation where it's, hey, everybody loves this guy, he's going to keep you in games, he's going to help you compete, and maybe he can win, but we also got this other guy who is going to be the player that we're developing to go in and be the franchise quarterback. It would take a lot to change my mind of thinking about Dobbs or no Dobbs. You're still focused on the draft next year at the quarterback position.
Yeah, I mean, like, the other day when we were on, I brought up the comparison of like John Kitna with the Cincinnati Bengals when they had drafted Carson Palmer, and they brought John Kitna in, and Kitna was kind of a guy that had been in Seattle, and Mike Holmgren had anointed him as the guy in Seattle in like 1998 or 9 or something like that. It didn't quite work out that way for John Kitna. He ended up moving on to Cincinnati, and he was just, Kitna was a quality quarterback. He was a guy that could, step in and start some games for you and keep you competitive and put up some decent numbers for you. But the plan all along for the Bengals was, look, now in the case of Cincinnati, they had used the number 1 overall pick to take Carson Palmer. So it's a little bit different than it maybe would be in the case of the Vikings if they're not, picking number 1 overall. But if your plan is to have a young quarterback in, as part of your future that you're going to grow and develop, depending on what Josh Dobbs does the rest of this season, if he does enough, performs well enough, and gets you maybe into a playoff spot, then he might be a guy that you want to bring in next year as your starter, and that way you can kind of slow cook things with that young quarterback that you take in the draft next spring. And, Josh Dobbs seems to me like a guy that would, depending on the situation, would stick around for a little bit to help that younger quarterback grow and develop and use some of his own experiences to help that young guy, whoever it may be.
Bland Toasts asks, if Dobbs continues to play well, is it more of a sign that he's a great quarterback, or that most any quarterback could play well enough with this team and coaching staff? See, the thing about that is, like, when we talk about almost any quarterback, it's like, well, there's definitely a must be this tall to get on the ride. Like Josh Dobbs has starter caliber skills. Like, obviously the running is pretty impressive, but his throwing ability also was better than I thought it was coming in. And you see the physical capabilities that are there with Josh Dobbs. So we have to start at that point. I don't think that Nick Mullins could do the same thing. When Nick Mullins was in San Francisco, he won like 4 games with Kyle Shanahan, and that's the one that's always talked about, right? And hey, Trey Lance could not succeed with Kyle Shanahan. So it's not like anybody can just be plopped into these situations if they're not all that good. I think what you're looking for is, how do you win the most games? And what a take, right? Like, now there's a bland toast take for you, but what I mean is, like, how strong does the team have to be? How good does the coaching have to be for this quarterback to actually compete for a Super Bowl? And what we see in San Francisco is, last year especially, and that was the best team in football, top to bottom, roster wise, and the best coach on the offensive side. That's what it took for Brock Purdy to get them to the NFC Championship. When Case Keenum went to the NFC Championship, they needed 2 of the best wide receivers in football, a really good running game, an offense that everybody bought into, and the number 1 defense in the NFL, and it still wasn't enough to get them there. So the question is, like, can you build that with Josh Dobbs, or do you need someone that's more physically skilled, as in accuracy and not turning the ball over and stuff like that, in the form of a first round potential draft pick? And also, what does Dobbs cost if he plays really well is going to be another discussion also, because we saw this from Daniel Jones, where if the NFL sees someone play good football for like this long, they're like, all right, lots of money going to that quarterback. And that, I mean, we are way down the road on that. My main goal was to focus on New Orleans, but we just went, completely off the deep end. But all these things end up playing into a discussion like we're talking about with Josh Dobbs. And it's also, altogether possible that we could see Jaren Hall back in 2 weeks because it doesn't work out well. So there's lots of different ways it could go. But I think, to answer the question, Manny, I think that if he plays really well, it's probably a sign that he was better than people thought he was. And it's also probably a sign that you don't have to have a $40 million, 36-year-old quarterback coming off an Achilles injury. And I'm not letting Dobbs make that decision for me. I'm just saying that it would be a pretty clear control case study to see how someone else performs in this offense over a longer sample size. And that's what Josh Dobbs gives you.
And sometimes in some situations, it just kind of requires, or it becomes kind of a perfect storm. I mean, I go back to, you know, and I'm not suggesting that Josh Dobbs is going to be this, but when you look at what happened with Kurt Warner with the St. Louis Rams in 1999, it was just kind of a perfect storm of really talented wide receivers, Hall of Fame caliber wide receivers, and a Hall of Fame running back and a good offensive line, and lots of resources, and kind of an innovative offensive mind for that time, and Mike Martz as the coordinator. Dick Vermeil as a head coach that kind of, in some ways, kind of had a little bit of a Kevin O'Connell in him, is that he was very positive minded, emotional, connected with his players on an emotional level, and it kind of drove that team to winning. And sometimes that's what it takes too. And Kurt Warner was a guy that people had kind of knew who he was when playing in the Arena League a little bit, but that was it. He had been a journeyman kind of guy, in Packers camp like the year before, and just not kind of an afterthought. And then just all of a sudden, boom, everything happened. And it was a perfect storm, and they went all the way to the Super Bowl and won. And, I'm not saying that that's going to happen with Josh Dobbs, but, it might just be a situation where Josh Dobbs and Kevin O'Connell are a really good fit, and they just, for whatever reason, it just works. Now, how well will it work? We're going to have to figure that out. We're going to have to see the rest of the season how that kind of plays out. But I think outside of that, it's really going to be hard to really pinpoint like exactly what it is that is working. It might just be a situation where it's a perfect storm, and it's maybe it's the best situation that Josh Dobbs will be in. for him to perform well in the course of his career.
What I've felt over the last week from Vikings fans, and if you look at our numbers, thank you everyone for joining. If you're new to the show, welcome, welcome. We've seen a bigger audience this week, is the energy that comes along with intrigue. And I think that what Josh Dobbs did is he gave you enough reason to be intrigued. If this was just a guy, like remember when Mike White had an average depth of target of like 2 yards, threw a bunch of screen passes and ended up with like 400 yards passing, like, whoa, Mike White. And then, like, okay, this is not the guy. I have experienced something similar to this when I was in Buffalo with Kyle Orton, where Kyle Orton had kind of been around the league and, was a starter sometimes, backup other times. And they benched EJ Manuel. Orton came in and won a streak of games. And everyone was like, whoa, the Bills may have just found their quarterback because this guy is such a great fit and he's playing so well with everybody. As time went on, it became more clear that it was still Kyle Orton. So that's the question here is, did they find a diamond in the rough because Dobbs had never gotten that opportunity before? And we've seen quarterback development work out before in the league and compare with his or combined with his physical skill. How fast he is and his natural instinct for running and everything else and his intelligence. You combine those like superpower type skills that he has, and you go like, maybe like this has more intrigue, I think, than we've had at the quarterback position since, I don't know, like since 2018. The most intrigue that we've had is, would they actually draft Lamar Jackson? No, they wouldn't. They took a corner. Hey, but would they actually extend Kirk? Oh, they did again. And then Will Levis is on the board, huh? Oh, okay. Well, they're going to take a wide receiver, which, look, no criticism for that wide receiver. But this is the most intrigue that we have had in a very long time at the quarterback position. And I think that's what has everybody kind of wondering what's going to come next. Can I ask you a Saints question? I want to pivot to a different thing. It leads into your top 5 list. At what point do you let go of beef with another team? And what I mean is, I know about 2009. Everybody does. Greg Williams, Sean Payton. But the Vikings have since then eliminated Sean Payton a couple of times in very epic fashion in the Minneapolis Miracle and then in 2019. And they also beat the Saints last year on the double doink over in London. They've pretty much owned the Saints recently, and Sean Payton is not there anymore. Is it time for people to let it go with the New Orleans Saints? Like, when do you move on to your next rival, whoever has bothered you lately? Or is that something that people should, as Vikings fans, just hold on to forever? Because I feel like it's just not the same Saints. It doesn't have the same juice if Sean Payton isn't there. And it's, Drew Brees doesn't play for him anymore. What are you really hating on other than the colors that they're wearing? Not saying you should love your opponent or something. It's just, it's time to find a new rival that you don't like, as opposed to like, oh, well, I hate the Saints because of 09. Like, okay, well, I don't know. I guess the same people own the team and so they play in the same stadium, but that's all that's really similar at this point.
Yeah, I mean, if you ask me, I let it go a long time ago. And the primary reason why I was able to let it go is because when you look at what has happened with the Saints ever since they won the Super Bowl that year against the Colts, that franchise has had a lot of heartbreak. I mean, you look at what do they call it? The Beast Quake, the Marshawn Lynch run that was in the playoffs the very next year. It's a 7-9 Seattle team that won a terrible NFC West division, and that play happens. And then you have the catch 3, the Vernon Davis winning touchdown in the divisional round the next year against San Francisco. You had the play where I think it was Marcus Colston. The Saints are driving for like a tying touchdown late in the playoffs against Seattle, and Marcus Colston does like he catches a pass and then he like throws the ball forward when he should have thrown it backwards, and it essentially just ended the game and ended any opportunity for the Saints to maybe tie that game when all he had to do was just catch the ball and step out of bounds to stop the clock because I think there were still like 5 seconds left. So there was that. There was the pass interference no call against the Rams in the NFC title game. There was the Vikings playoff game the next year after that, where the Vikings went down there and won in overtime. We'll get to that game a little bit later. But when you kind of look at the history of the Saints since that NFC title game, outside of the Super Bowl a couple weeks later, that's kind of a cursed franchise if you really think about just all the postseason heartbreak. So for me, it was kind of like it was easy for me to kind of let it go because it's like that's a fan base that's been kind of suffering a little bit ever since. It's almost like they're kind of paying back for their, the Saints are kind of paying back for their sins of that, the bounty gate and all of that stuff that happened in the 09 title game. Because they were able to go on and win the Super Bowl, and it feels like they're kind of just paying it back by going through a lot of suffering and heartbreaking postseason play. So I've gotten over it, and I'll just speak for myself. It's always easier for me to just get over stuff. You know what I mean? You look back on it and it's heartbreaking, but even like 98, I'm over that. It was almost 25 years ago. It's just the Vikings have had other opportunities to get to the Super Bowl since, and they've come up short. So I'm able to kind of just put that behind me and let it go. It's fun to talk about. It's fun to reminisce about sometimes and have some fun with, poking fun at the curses of all the heartbreak and everything. But for me, it's been really easy for me to get over a lot of this stuff. Can't speak for everybody else because some people still to this day hate Sean Payton and they're rooting for him to lose in Denver. A lot of people were enjoying the fact when the Dolphins hung 70 on the Broncos a few weeks back, and just because it was Sean Payton, and they hate him so much. So I don't know. I personally, I've been able to get over all that stuff. And, I think it's, hopefully some of the fans can kind of get past it too.
I think that if you're talking about Sean Payton paying his penance, and one you forgot was the Jared Cook fumble that playoff game. Who was that? I forget who that was against. Where they were en route, looking like they were going to win the game, and then he fumbles, they blow a lead, and so forth. But also, if there was any like, hey, you paid your debt to society type of situation, it was that Sean Payton was played by Kevin James in a movie on Netflix. Like that, I mean, I don't know if I would wish that on anybody. Now, you know what? I'd love to know in the comments if people have let it go about the Saints, or when the Saints are coming to town, you just deeply hate them, and like that's either way. Like I feel you, because that's a hard thing to move on from. What I'm always thinking about, Manny, is that people should just update their beefs. Like keep updating all the time. So look, Joe Buck hasn't done anything to you in years. He had the great Minneapolis Miracle call, dig, sideline, unbelievable, put it on shirts and everything else. So, hey, like that, let it go. We just update. We got new information. The guy gave you everything he had on a great call for your big moment. So you don't have to be mad at him for Randy Moss anymore. And the same thing goes for the Saints. Like they have been through absolute hell since they won that Super Bowl. And of course, many Vikings fans would sell their souls for one of those as well. But all right, like he's not here anymore. You can hate him individually, but it's really not their franchise anymore. So like update the beefs. People are talking about the Eagles. I'm not sure if a team owning you is really like a beef, but they're fans. Okay, that's true. The fan abuse in 2017, that's a good reason right there to start a new beef with a different fan base. So I was just kind of interested in your angle on that, because I know a lot of people, I get a lot of notes like I will always hate them no matter what happens and no matter who's coaching them and so forth. We will get to your list of the most compelling Vikings and Saints games of your lifetime. But first, Manny, want to let everybody know that in the second week of December, it's coming up pretty soon, I am headed to Las Vegas for football. And if you want to escape the Minnesota December weather like me, come join me at Circa Las Vegas, where I'll be hanging out and doing the podcast for a few days there leading up to the game. You can find me outside at Stadium Swim at Circa, watching games on their giant TV, spending time relaxing in their heated pools. So even if it's only 70 degrees in Vegas, they got the heated pools outside. That's awesome. It's one of the coolest places on earth to watch sports. And then the Friday night before the game, we're going to have a special party just for Minnesota fans there that includes drink specials, ticket giveaway. So come meet me there at Circa, talk about football at the amazing overhang bar inside of Circa Las Vegas. You have to RSVP for the party. So if you go to circalasvegas.com where it says sportsbook, click there and you'll see huddle up at overhang. Click that and you can RSVP for that weekend. So make a whole weekend of it at Circa in Las Vegas. Plus, this game now has some extra juice to it, I think, for maybe both teams, actually, if the Raiders are turning things around. So it is located again on Fremont Street, and we'll have a great getaway from the Minnesota winter there. And again, circalasvegas.com for more details. Book your spot today, and I will see you there. Do I need someone to carry my bags? They did give me, and I tweeted this out, they gave me a limo the last time that I went. And I have never actually been in a limo before. I was very surprised, but they picked me up at the airport and had a limo. I was like LeBron or something. I was like, are you sure this is for me? But Circa rolls out the red carpet. All right. So you have made this list. The best and most compelling games of your lifetime between the Minnesota Vikings and New Orleans Saints. Let us begin. I feel like we need to get some NFL music uploaded into the system for these top 5 lists. So we'll work on that for future reference to get the I'm not just going to sing it, but we need to get that for the show. We need to continue to upgrade here. So begin. Number 5, Saints Vikings, most compelling games of your lifetime, Manny. Go ahead.
Okay, number 5. So I'll preface all of this by saying, even though the Vikings historically have owned the Saints in the postseason, they've played 5 times and the Vikings have won 4. We know what the one is in that series. Don't need to speak on that anymore. But there's only 3 of those postseason games are on this list. So, and they are the top 3. But anyway, number 5, 2008. Week 5, Vikings 30, Saints 27. The Vikings win. This is Monday Night Football, by the way, and the Vikings are they win this game on a Ryan Longwell field goal with about 5 seconds left to win the game. But this game was wild, absolutely wild. The Vikings get a touchdown on a blocked field goal. Kevin Williams blocks a field goal. Antoine Winfield, as he's so good at just having a knack of knowing where the football is and going to get it, just like his kid, by the way, picks up the blocked field goal and runs it back for a 59-yard touchdown to tie the game at 7. We saw Chester Taylor throw a touchdown pass on a trick play to Visanthe Shenko in this game. And also, and I see we have one comment that says Bush punt return. You mean Bush punt returns, because Reggie Bush returned 2 punts for touchdowns in this game. And I remember when the second one happened, literally everybody else, everybody watching this game was like, why are you kicking to Reggie Bush again? Why would you punt to him again? He already burned you earlier in this game. So this game was absolutely a bonkers. And this was a high-powered Saints offense with Drew Brees really kind of in his prime. Was the year before the Saints won the Super Bowl. But Drew Brees was still like one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. And, if you take out the 2 Reggie Bush punt returns, the Vikings defense actually held a pretty powerful offense to under 20 points in this game. So Vikings win that game 30-27. Number 4 may surprise a lot of people, because I think it might be a game that people will remember when I mention it, but I guarantee you nobody has thought about this game in the 20 plus years since it happened. Week 15.
Can I guess? Yes. Is it 2001?
I think you know what game I'm talking about, but you're thinking of the wrong year.
Oh, okay. Is this Dante at the end of the game?
Yes,
Okay, okay, I'm
yes.
thinking of the
Okay.
wrong year. Is it what, 03?
Oh, 02, 2002.
02. Okay. Okay.
This was
Gotcha. All
this
right. Go ahead. If people don't remember this one, I watched this not too long ago on YouTube, and holy cow, for a lost season, mind blown. So go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is week 15 of 2002, the first full season with Mike Tice as head coach of the Vikings. And the season is just a disaster. The defense is just completely falling apart. It's awful. The Vikings are 3-10 going into this game. They're one of the worst teams in the league outside of Culpepper and Moss. Um, but Dante and Randy Moss put on a show. And Randy has 11 catches, 113 yards, and 2 touchdowns, including a touchdown late in the game with 5 seconds left to make it 31-30. And Mike Tice, and I love this, and this is part of the reason why I love Ticey so much. Mike Tice said, "What the hell? We're 3-10. We've got nothing else to lose here. Let's just go for the win." So they go for the 2-point conversion. And it's fantastic because it looks like everything's going to fall apart. Dante's in the shotgun. He takes the snap, bobbles the ball, kind of fumbles the ball, and he just has the instincts to pick it up and run it in for the 2-point conversion for the Vikings to go up 32-31, and they go on to win against a pretty good Saints team. This was before Sean Payton and Drew Brees. This was the Jim Haslett, Aaron Brooks, Deuce McAllister, Joe Horn Saints. So they weren't a great team, not like a championship contending team, but it was a pretty good team that was, in playoff contention for a few years there. So the Vikings pick up a wild, crazy win to go to 4-10. The Vikings actually ended that season with 3 straight wins to finish 6-10 on the year. And so people were pretty excited going into 2003. So the Vikings win that game 32-31. All right, number 3 is a game that I decided to go on YouTube and rewatch late this afternoon. It is the 1987 NFC wildcard game. The Saints go into the Superdome, or the Vikings go into the Superdome and just absolutely throttle the Saints 44-10. Here's what makes this game awesome, though. It's not that the Vikings blew out the Saints, which was awesome in its own right. The way this game started for the Vikings was a total disaster. First play of the game, the Vikings get the opening kickoff. First play of the game, Tommy Kramer, who before I watched this game, I did not know had actually started this game for the Vikings. I thought it was Wade Wilson because Vikings went to the NFC Championship game that year, and Wade Wilson was the quarterback for that run. But I didn't know that Tommy Kramer had started this game, actually. So he starts the game. First play of the game, he gets sacked for like a 7-yard loss. And the Saints crowd, even back then, the Superdome, the roof is going to get blown out. The crowd is going crazy. So Tommy Kramer gets sacked first play of the game. Second play of the game, it's like a botched handoff or something happens where the ball gets fumbled and the Saints recover the ball. So, it's just a disastrous start. 2 plays later, Bobby Hebert throws a touchdown pass. It's 7-0 Saints. The crowd is going nuts, and it's looking like the Vikings are going to get blown out. And obviously, we all know that they didn't. But when you look at the way this game started, it's like, holy bleep. Like, this game, the Vikings blew the Saints out in this game. This should have been the opposite way. And then on the ensuing possession, Tommy Kramer gets hit on a pass that gets incomplete, and they punt. And then Kramer gets pulled from the game, and in comes Wade Wilson. And things don't really start out that great for Wade Wilson either. But then they kind of pick up the play a little bit. Anthony Carter returns a punt for a touchdown. Anthony Carter, by the way, for younger Vikings fans, I knew this already, but for younger Vikings fans who didn't get a chance to see Anthony Carter, older fans would get it. Anthony Carter was a beast. This guy was, he was 6 feet tall, was about 160, 165 pounds. He's like Allen Iverson. He's like not very big at all, but he's fast and he's just a monster. Returns this punt for a touchdown to give the Vikings a 10-7 lead. We saw a trick play, another halfback pass for a touchdown where Allen Rice throws a touchdown pass in the game. Wade Wilson threw a sort of a tight window throw to Steve Jordan for a touchdown. The Vikings eventually win the game 44-10. And Tommy Kramer actually comes back in the game in the third quarter because the Vikings had were up big. They were up 31-10 at the half. They had Wilson had hit, I think it was Leo Lewis, if I remember, on a Hail Mary to end the first half to go up 31-10. And then Jerry Burns just decides, put Tommy Kramer back out there. What the hell? We're up big. Let's get Tommy some more reps or whatever. But an interesting stat, Madden and Summerall, who did this game for CBS, brought this up before the game, because I told you that I was going to watch this game, and you were talking about how Tommy Kramer was always banged up. He was always injured. So an interesting stat that they discovered, Madden and Summerall, was that they put up a graphic that had the games started by Tommy Kramer and Wade Wilson. Wade Wilson has started 7 games. Tommy Kramer has started 5. This was the strike year, so they had the replacement players for 3 weeks. Wade Wilson started 7 games, finished 6, ended up with a 5-2 record. Tommy Kramer started 5 games, had a 3-2 record as a starter, 0 games finished. So it's like Tommy Kramer that's incredible. Like he was so banged up, he never finished any games that he played in. So that was amazing. And of course, we know the rest is history. The Vikings went on to the NFC title game that year.
Yeah, a couple things on that. Number one is, do you ever think about moments from either our childhood or history in sports of like what Twitter would have looked like? Because if you remember in 1987, they limped into the playoffs. It was very ugly. And Patrick Royce loves to tell the story of him writing a column of like, this team's done. They have no chance to win in the playoffs. The Saints are going to crush them. Look how bad they've played leading into the postseason. And then they demolished the Saints. But then, you start the game down 7-0. I cannot imagine what that would have looked like, how angry people were and how much they must have thought the season is over. I also agree with you. Multiple people have said in the comments, Anthony Carter, Jordan Addison, there is a comp there. And I think that's right. This undersized guy who the way he flew through the air to catch that Dobbs pass and keep his feet down, that was very Anthony Carter-like, because Carter had such springs in his feet, and he was such a natural like catcher of the football. And yeah, this is like us being old guys, but I mean, what a great player he was, and him driving that run in 1987 is, I think, one of the greatest performances in the playoffs from a receiver. Kind of reminds me of like Steve Smith that one year for was it Carolina, where he just went completely nuts over a couple games. But Carter's performance is way up there. And to do it with also Wade Wilson, who I think was one of the coolest quarterbacks in Vikings history, because the dude would just let it loose. He would come in the game and just throw it deep down the field. Anthony Carter. So that win, very, very much one of I think the best in Vikings history. If you were ranking all their wins in history, that's one of the most impressive that they ever had. So now, number 2 and number 1, I think it's going to be hard not to guess what they are, but why don't you take us through it?
So number 2, I think it's pretty obvious. 2019 NFC wildcard, Vikings beat the Saints 26-20 in overtime. So much going. I mean, you've been covering this team for going on 8 seasons now. So much was happening with that team going into that game. So much speculation about, is Mike Zimmer gonna, is he gonna get fired if they lose this game, or is he gonna get traded to the Cowboys if they lose this game? Like, what's gonna happen with the Vikings going forward? Because I think a lot of people felt like it was kind of a foregone conclusion that they were going to lose this game. The Saints were a 13-3 high-powered offense team that, a lot of people thought could go to the Super Bowl. And the Vikings just go in there and find a way to win. The Saints have, Taysom Hill is making plays all over the field for the Saints, and Kirk Cousins makes some throws, the big throw to Adam Thielen to set up the Kyle Rudolph winning touchdown. I know people would kind of get on Stephon Diggs about, everything that kind of went down that season and all the emotions that he had, the time where he, kind of went AWOL and disappeared from the team for a few days or whatever it was. And Diggs only had 2 catches in that game, if you remember. And I think it was for like 14 yards or something. but they were like two of the biggest catches of that game because they were both on third down and they both set up touchdowns in that game. The one earlier, I think it was like a pass like inside the 5-yard line that he caught on third down that set up a touchdown. And then he had the other one was it was like 3rd and 7, kind of a slant pass that he caught from Cousins that kept that drive going. And then I think it was Cousins hitting Thielen on the deep pass to set up the Rudolph touchdown after that. So only 2 catches, but 2 of the biggest catches in recent playoff memory for the Vikings, as far as that's concerned. So Vikings win that game 26-20. We know what happened the next week in San Francisco.
Yeah, let me throw a couple things out there about that game. And I think Scott is right that that was the last year of the old overtime rules. But I think that even with the new overtime rules, scoring a touchdown would win you the game anyway. I think, or wait, is it, okay, I'm going to have to, the playoffs. Someone's going to have to remind me if the playoffs are different. Both teams don't, if you score a touchdown, it's over, right? Still? Or is that changing? I don't know.
Because I don't think the Saints never had the ball in overtime, I don't think, right?
Right. No, they didn't. But that game in particular, there's one of the things I love about playoff games and going back and watching them is these moments that happen. And K-Mac is bringing up one of them that I was going to bring up. These moments happen that shape the game that just never leave you, right? That you just think about forever. One of them is Thielen fumbling on the opening drive, and the Saints come out with the ball, and you're like, oh my God, this is a 13-win team with Drew Brees. Like, this is going to be over fast. If they fumble the ball, they hadn't played particularly well going into the playoffs. Geez. And they held them to a field goal. And it right there, I remember thinking, because I was there in the Superdome, like that's big. Like, that might be big. And another one was that at the end of the half, they returned a kickoff back into field goal position and then missed a pretty decently easy field goal. And again, it was one of those that could come up later. And with Mike Zimmer, one thing I always try to push back against is when we're talking about Kevin O'Connell and we compare him to Mike Zimmer, and we go like, oh, well, Zimmer wouldn't have won that game or whatever. And look, the last couple of years of Zimmer, very rocky, very ugly inside those walls. But the defensive game plan he had for Drew Brees in that game was a masterpiece. I think it was his best work, even past 2017. I think it was his best work because of how good that team really was. So those couple of things really stand out to me. And also, you talk about Diggs. He was on the sideline, and I remember him being shown super upset on the sideline. In the Superdome, you're like really looking down on everything, so you could see kind of everything on the sidelines. And I remember seeing him being so upset, and everyone's thinking like, "Oh, Diggs is having a meltdown and whatever else." And then when the NFL film stuff came out, it showed him like yelling at Kirk Cousins to trust him and believe in him and believe in himself, which I thought was kind of interesting. And that was one of those moments where Kirk overcame those whole, like, can he lead a game-winning drive and everything else, and still remains and may always end up being his best moment as a Minnesota Vikings quarterback. All right. I cannot imagine what your number one on your list is, Manny. Go ahead.
Really? You can guess it's that obvious, huh? It's that obvious what number one on the list is. Yeah, of course it is. 2017 NFC divisional playoff. Minneapolis Miracle, say no more. 29-24. Diggs sideline touchdown, unbelievable. The call from Joe Buck, as you mentioned earlier, just an all-time just classic game. A chess match between Mike Zimmer and Sean Payton, and the Vikings kind of withstanding an onslaught of just quarterback precision and just like a surgical second half performance by Drew Brees. And the Vikings survive it. Obviously, it's the big play at the end that ends up winning the game. But that was a tough second half. The Vikings really had to kind of endure just a masterful performance by Drew Brees in the second half of that game because the defense was dominant over the Saints in the first half. They had an interception and just really were able to get off the field a lot on third down situations. But then we just saw Drew Brees make some unbelievable throws in the second half of that game, especially on the drive. There was I think it was the fourth and 8 or something, where he hit somebody on the near side, according to the TV screen. This was the drive that Will Lutz kicks the field goal to go up 24-23 and essentially win the game. I mean, we all thought it was over at that point, but there was like a 4th and 8, and just Drew Brees just drops. I forget who the receiver was, but he just drops an absolute dime to convert that 4th down. And I'm like, oh my God, the Saints are going to win this game because Drew Brees is on fire right now. He can't miss. He's hitting everybody. But I think the big moment in that game was, I think it was like a third down there was a third down run on that drive that ended up forcing the field goal. And that was huge because if the Saints pick up the first down there, they're running the clock down and letting Will Lutz kick the field goal as time expires to then win the game. And there is no miracle at that point. Very subtle, just like a 2-yard handoff that, forces the 4th down. But that play was everything. It completely would have changed the landscape of the game if the Saints convert that third down. So
that's one of those games. I don't know if you've ever seen anybody tweet out like, hey, if someone woke you up in the middle of the night and you had to give a TED talk, like what would it be on? Like
yes.
all the times that the Vikings could have lost that game or that they could have won the game. It's mentioned in the comments, the Kai Forbath 52-yard field goal, the most cursed kicking franchise, and Forbath comes out and makes that field goal and then isn't brought back the next year for some reason. But that's a whole another discussion. And what you're talking about, it was Willie Snead on an out route where he beat Mackenzie Alexander, and part of that was I don't know if he was on the field in part because Andrew Sendejo had gotten hurt right in that game. I think it was Sendejo who'd gotten hurt. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe he had just been playing at that point. But I believe he broke an out route, and the anticipation on the throw was so insane. Like when you went back and looked at it, Brees was getting the pocket push and released the ball when the dude wasn't anywhere close to looking or turning around. He breaks. It's right there. And as Juan is mentioning, that was heartbreaking, I think, for everybody in the stadium. That was soul crushing. And then we used to have this joke in the press box during that season. Why are people running at Linval Joseph? It was one of the most dominant nose tackle seasons I've ever seen in my life. Yeah. Every third and short, I remember looking at the numbers on this. They had destroyed the rest of the league. They were head and shoulders above on third and short, fourth and short, especially running up the middle at Linval Joseph. And with Drew Brees as your quarterback on third down, and this is what they'll always regret. Also, maybe Willie Snead throwing a pass in that game, but they'll always regret handing off and having that run stuffed. And I can't remember who it was that got in there. I think it might have been Anthony Harris who got in there and made that play. And he was the one that came in from Andrew Sendejo. All the puzzle pieces of the Minneapolis Miracle, they just fit so beautifully together, from the blocked punt, which was caused by the backup long snapper. I mean, there's so many things. The Vikings kicking a field goal early in the game, they only go up 17 instead of going up, maybe if they score a touchdown there and so forth. The right tackle was moved to left guard, I think. And so you had like Rashad Hill facing Cameron Jordan, plays the game of his life. So many things had to come together for the Minneapolis Miracle to happen. Easily the best matchup there, and one of the tops ever in Vikings history. Juan asks also about the Superdome and favorite playoff stadiums. Well, the Vikings haven't been in the playoffs that much since I've been covering the team. So the only places that I've traveled for a playoff game are the Superdome and San Francisco. And when I was working in Buffalo, they made the playoffs 0 times. So that's my only experience. Yeah, I would say the Superdome, it was completely insane. US Bank Stadium is wild in the playoffs. The noise is out of control. And San Francisco is, it's not like the old Candlestick or something, but we could talk all night to me about the Minneapolis Miracle and everything that came before and everything that came after. That is a great list, and I'm glad you put that together, Manny. So let me ask you this. When we talk next on Monday, and I want to compare what we're going to say right now to what actually we're discussing, what are we going to be talking about with the Minnesota Vikings next Monday? Are we going to be saying, dude, this Josh Dobbs thing, this is no fluke? Or are we going to be saying, okay, well, look, they're not out of the playoff race, but that was the letdown game that happens sometimes during a season. What are we going to be saying?
I think we're going to be saying that the Vikings found a way to win a football game. It was not going to be pretty. I don't think it's going to look great because it's going to be a real challenge, I think, going up against that Saints defense on Sunday. But I think they're going to find a way to win. I think their defense is going to, I think the Vikings defense is going to keep them in this. And I think Josh Dobbs is going to do just enough to pull out a win. I'm going to say the Vikings win 20-16. And we're going to be looking at this and saying, hey, it wasn't pretty, but Josh Dobbs found a way. He overcame some things. There was a big run in the third quarter that led to a touchdown that otherwise would have been a field goal if it hadn't been converted. And maybe that ends up being kind of the difference in the game. That's what I think we're going to be talking about on Monday, that it didn't look great, but the resiliency of this team allowed them to kind of overcome a bit of a challenge going up against that Saints defense on Sunday.
I think we're going to be talking about how they did not win, but they showed, and don't call me a hater. I'm just saying, like, these things happen, but they did show resilience in the game, a back and forth battle. I just think it's a lot to ask with how banged up they are. That's a major factor to me. It looks like it looks like KJ Osborne might have a chance to play, but I don't know if he will. And if he doesn't, and then you're in pretty tough there. Christian Darrisaw's banged up. TJ Hawkinson's playing with half a body this week after he got banged up last week. The defense had to be on the field a ton. And what you saw, the one thing that I would be a little concerned about is what you saw at the end of the Falcons game. They had that drive where they scored a touchdown, and the Vikings defense did start to get worn down. They were on the field a lot during that Falcons game. All these things are kind of tough, but I think it'll be a battle. I think it'll be a close battle between two teams that are pretty evenly matched. To your question, Juan, if Madison answers the call, running against this defense is hard, and that's another factor for me. Running is going to be hard. This one might be one of those where you dial up some crazy, Jordan Addison throws a touchdown to Brandon Powell or something. Like maybe you need something like that to be as part of this game. Sean Mannion with the comeback win is the only answer, Scott. Thank you. That's I have a milkshake bet with Kevin Seifert for the rest of the season if Sean Mannion takes a single snap. So that even means like victory formation. That means anything. Somebody gets banged up, he has to come in hands off and then leaves. Anything. Kevin thinks that Sean Mannion will take at least one snap. I say no. I think that Jaron Hall or Nick Mullins is going to come back. They'll be the backup, and we'll never see Sean Mannion take a snap. Which side would you take of that?
If Sean Mannion has to take a snap, in any scenario where the Vikings are not up by like 4 touchdowns, we're in deep trouble.
Well, that's
it's not good if that's the case, if that's what happens. Now, if they're up by 4 touchdowns and Mannion's in the game because you just don't want Dobbs or Hall or anybody else to get hurt, then okay, I'm cool with that. But if he's in the game under any other circumstance, whoa, baby, look out.
And that would lose me the bet. If they were up by 3 touchdowns, Sean Mannion comes in just for a handoff or something, whatever. I did think, before we wrap up, with Sean Mannion, he's one of the players that I've covered that I appreciate the most because he is so intelligent and such a professional and everything else, and everybody respects this guy. But when Kevin O'Connell was talking about him, he goes, hey, he's going to be a heck of a coach one day. I'm like, yeah, man, that tells you the story right there. Like, we don't want Sean Mannion playing. We want him in that room, and we want him as, a major part of that room. And other than that, Let's not have him play in the football game. So you're right. Horse feathers. We did go after 9, so we should have gotten a little weirder here on the show. But anyway, we got a lot of awesome football to go back to for Thursday night to see how excited Al Michaels is about the game. And so we're going to go find that out. But thank you, Manny. Great list tonight. Really enjoyed kind of going down that road. It's been all Dobbs mania all the time and haven't really talked about the actual matchup. So great stuff from you. Great stuff from everybody in the comments. Really appreciate your participation. If you're just finding the channel, every Monday and Thursday, we go live here. Also, we premiere new episodes on the channel with myself and Jeremiah Searles on Tuesday nights. Sometimes Wednesday, depends on what's going on. We'll be live as well. And then Friday nights, we have on the YouTube channel, the Roundtable as well with myself, Will Ragetz, and Andrew Kramer. So we stuff your face with football as only I can. So thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you all soon.